You're listening to the Spare Office podcast hosted by the Crosspoint student staff.
No, is the camera already on?
It's on.
Sheet.
Okay, well,
We gotta
welcome
start
back.
that over because
We gotta
I
start
was
that over.
making a face.
Okay, perfect. All right, here we are. Welcome back to the Spare Office podcast. We are Crosspoint student ministry, at least almost all of us. Abby's on vacation
Close
this week,
to
so
it.
she's not here. I'm Daniel,
I'm Anna.
I'm Trace.
and we're so glad that you guys didn't see or hear all of the craziness that was just happening before we pressed record.
Nothing.
Although I think JC Grace got a lot of it in there. This is our final episode, at least as far as we've planned
Hit the button.
for. We're having way too much fun today.
That's good.
But for season 2 of the Spare Office podcast, and maybe the next time you see us, we're in a different room. Who knows? We got all kinds of ideas. What we actually execute is the question, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
So in this episode, we are going to talk about wisdom and faith. And I like to call this the dynamic duo. Apparently that's been throwing everybody a curveball as we've been preparing for this episode. And see, the fact that neither of y'all had any comments is proof.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So we're going to start with a game. It's really not a game. It's just some questions,
Hate games.
hypothetical questions that I'm going to ask you guys, and I want you to answer them. And so you can only answer them with one word,
Oh.
Great.
with either the word faith or the word wisdom. Okay? So these are just some good questions. Anna apparently has experienced almost all of these things in her actual life, but it'll make sense once we get there. All right. So first question. You're offered your dream job, but it means that you have to move across the country. To make this decision, are you applying faith or are you applying wisdom? Which one are you using more?
Faith.
Faith. Okay. Next question. Your friend is making a terrible decision and asks you for advice. Faith or wisdom?
Wisdom.
All right.
Wisdom.
Okay.
Copycat.
All right. Final question.
I'm going first.
Final question. You feel like God is calling you to do something that feels a little crazy. Faith or wisdom?
Faith.
Faith.
Okay. So this was kind of a catch-22 because I think both of you guys would have preferred to say it.
Both.
Yeah. We would prefer to say both. So the reason that we did this little exercise is because I think that the world separates these two things, faith and wisdom. And I think that a lot of times from the world's perspective, we think of faith as what the world often calls a blind leap. And we refer to wisdom as maybe another thing called common sense. But from a Christian perspective, we would say faith and wisdom, they're inseparable. They go hand in hand. You don't take a quote unquote blind leap of faith without having biblical wisdom of God's character, God's nature, and commands that the Lord gives us to inform the faith steps that we take. So, such as, God's calling us to do something crazy by the world standards. When we are applying wisdom and faith, it might seem crazy, but it makes sense when we know that God's behind it.
I don't know if this is about to make sense. I think it makes sense in my head, but it's almost like for us, the wisdom comes from knowing, but not necessarily experiencing yet. So that's the faith. But in the world, it seems like here's faith, here's wisdom, because faith is not knowing and wisdom is knowing. Did that make sense?
Wisdom is knowing what?
Right. Like I have the wisdom to know whether or not to do this because of experience, I guess. And then faith is like, I'm just going to have faith because I've never experienced this before. So I think that's sometimes the break that we make, like,
Yeah.
oh, is it this or this? But
Right.
in our faith, in our beliefs,
Uh-huh.
our faith is based on the wisdom or the knowledge. We may not have ever seen it, but we know it to be true.
Yep. Perfect segue into the scripture that I think most applies here. It's Joshua 1:9. Be strong and courageous. Joshua was being called by God to lead the Israelites into the promised land. Moses had just died. They've just crossed over the Jordan River. And now they're about to enter the promised land. They've never been there. So just like you're describing, they're going into uncharted territory. And what does God say? He says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged. Why? How is that possible? For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And so I think that that is so helpful to us to understand how these two things work together. Excuse me. So I can have knowledge that God is with me based on what I know that the Bible says about God, about his character, about his promises, about his presence in our lives, simply what the Bible teaches us about him, his nature, informs these realities in our life. Trace, I'll ask you this and you help us with it. Just because this truth exists, does that mean that it automatically applies to our life? As in how you actually process the truth. God is with you, right? That's the truth. But what do you have to do to apply that truth to your life?
I have to trust it. I have to actually believe that. And so that's, something I'm big on and asking myself, my personal walk with the Lord is I want to grow in faith, as far as actually believing the things, these wise things that the Bible has to say, these truths that, that God is with me, that's a wonderful reality. But do I actually believe that? When I preached earlier this summer on does the Lord works all things for good? Well, that's a great reality. But in my lived experience of life, do I actually believe that?
Right.
Because then that has implications on how I'm living day to day. Do I actually believe that the Lord is using this thing, recording this podcast, for my good? Everything in my day, even the bad things. And so all of those things, do I actually, in my experience, believe?
Right.
And that's, so we can't separate these two things, of wisdom and faith completely. They're categories in the Bible that help us understand what it means to be a follower of Jesus and a follower of God, that are not completely unmarried. We can be strong, we can be courageous, we can walk wisely as we fear the Lord. That is wisdom as we trust him. We can only be strong and courageous. We can only be wise as we trust God that he is, beyond us.
Yeah.
His control.
Yeah. We said in the very first episode of our podcast, when we were really exploring what is biblical wisdom, and we talked about fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and we really explored that. One of the things that we said is that wisdom is the idea that we choose to live God's way. Right? So when God told Joshua, be strong and courageous, do not be afraid, Joshua had to actually apply the reality that God is present to the command that God was giving to go into the promised land. He couldn't go into the promised land fearlessly, courageously, without trusting that God's going to be the one who paves the way for us to get there and do this thing. Anna, it's impossible for us to think about what God called you to do going to another country without also having that same level of faith in your life. But question for you, did that mean that you weren't scared?
No.
So tell us how you worked through that.
It just didn't make sense. And I feel like I've talked about this on one of the other podcasts, but having faith to make a decision that didn't make sense, that seemed crazy to everyone else and kind of seemed crazy to me, was not just like you said at the beginning, just this leap of faith, a blind faith. It was a faith knowing that I was going to be okay because the Lord was in control. A faith having the wisdom that, God is with me. God will not leave me or forsake me. I was scared because I left something that I loved so much, but I was making a decision to do something for the Lord. So it's if I'm glorifying him in this, which I'm called to glorify God in all things, it's going to be okay. I don't know how it's going to be okay. I don't know how I'm going to feel or how things are going to go, but I'm scared, but God is still good. And yeah.
Yeah. It's to actually have wisdom, to apply wisdom in some of these things, is to almost look foolish. Again, we use this contrast of worldly wisdom versus biblical wisdom. And sometimes the wise decision, the wise thing to do is to look like a fool, is to make the wrong decision by worldly standards.
Yeah.
I mean, when my first got called to ministry, he was a UPS driver and he was making good money. And he got the call into ministry, and he started working at my home church, and like he took a big pay cut to do that. And some people were not very happy with him because by worldly standards, that's a foolish decision.
Yeah.
You know, you got 3 kids and a wife to look after. But that's actually the wisest decision, because through that, it actually strengthened his relationship with his kids and my mom. And so and through that, through making a foolish decision, it was actually much wiser in the long run. And so sometimes we have to make those things, and they're like, okay, we can't divorce these things of faith and wisdom.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand, and the Lord calls us to both those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And we also have to keep in mind, as we think through these various circumstances that come in to this reality of our life and the truths that God proclaims to us through his word, all of these things are only going to make sense, even when sometimes they don't make sense. They're only going to make sense when we are thinking with eternity in perspective. Because most of the time, all the time, the world is basing its wisdom off of short-term temporary outcomes, short-term temporary rewards. You know, well, you got to go pick that job, or you got to go do that thing because it's what's going to give you more money in the long run, or because it's what's going to set you up for a better retirement, or because it's what's going to provide for your kids' education when they graduate high school, various things like that. But that's not the perspective that God calls us to. Why? Because even though that is thinking long-term as far as your physical life on earth is concerned, we have eternity to keep in mind here. And that's what God calls us to above all else, is to keep eternity in perspective. And so that's the reality of what causes us as followers of Christ to make what the world would say is really foolish decisions sometimes. So this quote is not original to me, and this is kind of helping us shift a little bit. But someone once said, the great enemy of faith is fear. And fear causes the believer to approach the challenges of Christian service with a sense of reduced confidence. Therefore, the Lord said, do not be afraid. So, you know, I know that we all can share stories, especially from our teenage years, as we speak to our students here, of times in our life where fear got the best of us, right? I can think of a personal time in my life where fear got the best of me, and it's when I played 7th grade football. And I know that it's just like, wow, that feels like forever ago. Is that actually going to apply to life now? But I learned something from that. The fear was that I couldn't finish, that I wasn't tough enough, that I couldn't handle hitting or getting hit. It was a major challenge in my life to finish, and I quit football 1 week before the season was over. And I did it because I was afraid. But I learned something from it, and I'm thankful, Trace, to your point, that the Lord works all things for our good. I learned something from it, that I don't want to be a quitter. And quitting because I was afraid was something that I never wanted to allow in my life again. And so it actually made me tougher. Even though I look back on it and I still regret it, it made me tougher. Can y'all think of a time in your lives? I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, I've never been afraid of anything.
Right.
I'm afraid of literally everything.
You're so courageous.
Which story?
Nothing. No stories.
Look,
Pops
most of
in your head right now.
not getting scared stories refer to roaches or wasps in the dark. But I do think there are many times that I have been afraid of having conversations, I've let fear dominate
Say the same thing.
me from doing good that I knew the Lord was calling me to. Whenever we have to ask for forgiveness, obviously we have to ask for forgiveness for the things that we have willfully done in disobedience to God, both in doing bad and also failing to do good. And so there have been times that I've let fear keep me from, there were friends I saw wandering in high school that, I grew up with going to Bible study and in church. And I was like, man, I really should just say something to them. And I didn't because I was scared. I was scared of being made fun of or rejected or really jeopardizing that friendship. And, I've seen a lot of friends walk away from the faith. I'm like, man, what if I just said something? Would it have been different? And I can both rely on the grace that, the Lord, he sustains me through failure. But also I hope that I can learn that from those lessons, man, like I should be okay with an uncomfortable conversation because something much larger is at stake. And so, we let fear cripple us. We absolutely do, both from silly things like roaches and football. And then also from the biggest things, our relationships with people.
Yeah. I would say the same thing. Like I can look back in high school and like I just remember instances sitting in science and there's a girl that I was friends with growing up and we're not friends anymore. And I know like as you were talking, I just thought about, when I'm teaching the 8th grade girls on a Sunday morning and I'm like, just talk to the person, just do this, just say it, just have the conversation. But then I'm like, okay, if I was in the 8th grade and someone was telling me to do that, would I have had the confidence to do that? Did I have the confidence to do that? I did not. Because it's scary. High school or middle school, that's your entire world. You don't just get to go and have an uncomfortable conversation with someone and then the next day you don't ever have to go back to school again or see that. Like you have to go back and face these people all the time. So it's easier, I think, as an adult to be like, you know what? Why should I be afraid of that conversation? And I've had conversations with people as an adult, friends that are other adults, like, hey, what you're doing is wrong. How you're living is wrong. And the Lord has blessed those conversations and I'm so thankful, but I'm also like, oh, why could I not have done that when I was sitting in that science class with that girl who I know does not walk with the Lord anymore, but I spent years from first grade up to graduating high school with this girl, and I had all that time, and I just didn't use it wisely.
Yeah, so that leads us to a good quote that comes from Carly Wilson Baker, who said, "Courage is fear that has said its prayers." Super simple. And we could take that a lot of different ways, but I think if we take this at face value, it means that we're all going to be afraid of things at some point or another. Mm-hmm. And courage is the willingness to take your fear to the Lord and say, God, this is what I'm scared of, and this is why I'm afraid, and this is what I'm afraid is going to happen. This is what I'm worried might take place, whatever it might be, and just take it to the Lord. Be transparent with Him. Because if we're taking it to Him, at the end of the day, what that means is that we believe that He can do something with it.
Right.
Even if we're afraid that it's not going to go the way we want it to, we know He can do something with it. Mm-hmm. We know that He can give us the courage to have those conversations. We know that He can give us the strength to finish the football season. We know that He can give us whatever it is that we need in that moment to accomplish what He's called us to finish what we start. Mm-hmm. And so students, that's something that we want you, parents, it's something we want you to think about, because even as parents, for those of you who are listening and your students in our student ministry, you might be fearful of having certain conversations with your teenager that you need to have. You might be afraid of going into certain subjects that you're concerned that your teenager is going to reject if you try to talk to them about it. Or you might be the parent of a teenager who's estranged from church, and you're afraid that if you try to force them to go to church that they're going to, push away from God or reject God or whatever it may be. You may be afraid of those things, worried about what might happen if I fill in the blank. So take that to the Lord.
Yeah.
Be courageous with it and see what God does with that as you take steps of faith with wisdom to be obedient to what He's called us to.
Yeah.
That's good.
I think that's like, it's crazy how much fear drives us to disobedience, both in these things we've talked about. And even just, I think every time we sin, it's because we're fearing missing out on something. Anytime we commit a sin, it's because we fear that if we don't do this, then we're missing out on some sort of pleasure or satisfaction. Whether it's like, talking back, you're fearing that if you don't get the final word in, that, you're just not going to be happier in the long run. Mm-hmm. And so we got to have that faith to walk wisely as God has told us to. Be like, no, I have to remember that this fear that I'm going to miss out. No, I'm actually missing out on something much greater if I don't obey God, mm-hmm. if I don't follow him in this, if I don't walk by faith and not by sight. So we have to remind ourselves, man, I should not let fear of missing out on something lesser drive me to miss out on the greatest thing that I could ever take part of.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I do want to say, like, I've never heard that quote before, but I was like, whew, that's a good quote, because I do remember a time where, like I said, it's hard to have these conversations. I grew up really not talking much at all. There were people I graduated school with that just didn't know I could talk, which people listening to this are probably like, what? But it was true. But like going from that to being able to have one of the most challenging conversations I've ever had with a friend, like calling out sin. I don't know that. And I could have only done that because I constantly prayed for this friend, mm-hmm. constantly, tears filling my eyes, filling the pillows. I'm sure Juan was probably like, what is wrong with her? But I remember weeping over my friend. And because I did that, and because I did research, and because I read the scripture, God gave me the wisdom to take the step of faith to have a hard conversation. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't know, that's good. Courage is fear that has said its prayers, because you're not going to have the courage to do anything, to say anything, to act on your faith if you don't pray about it first.
Yeah. So wisdom is knowing that God is with us, and faith is going to the Lord and saying, God, I'm afraid to do this, but I know you've called me to it. So I'm going to trust in you. Mm-hmm. And when you put those two things together, I believe that we see tremendous blessings come from the Lord, not only in our lives, but in the lives of those that those decisions impact. Mm-hmm. So students, we're excited to see what this year is going to hold for us as we kind of wrap up this season. We might have some bonus episodes. Who knows what's going to come up. But as we feel the Lord leading, we're going to try to be faithful with the podcast. It's a fun way for us to connect with you and to have, good conversation and bring you into what's going on in our lives as far as like our workflow is concerned. So I hope that you're enjoying this, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. So until then, this is the end of season 2 of the Spare Office podcast, and we look forward to seeing you guys real soon.
Bye.
You've been listening to the Spare Office podcast hosted by the CrossPoint student staff. We would love to hear your feedback and questions, so you can contact us on Instagram at cpstudents_info or on Facebook at CrossPoint Students. Again, thank you for listening to this episode of the Spare Office podcast.